I am back to show you all enjoyment well done. From here, I get a sweep of the whole thing. Right down the pit. Got a small beam of light in the grill. Circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue with Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission.
Hello.
Welcome to the Functional Human Podcast. Yeah, Daryl, I think you should still dance during that intro, and we'll just kind of, maybe it can bleed over into the fade in, and we'll figure it out. That has to be in there. We have to figure out a way to get that in there.
Yeah, I noticed that because usually you hear my little.
Yeah, I mean, we need to let you live vicariously and be a drummer, the drummer that you never were. Yeah. So here we are for another episode. And we're on quitefrankly.tv now, which is really exciting. And I don't even know what number episode this is, but thank you guys for being here. And I'm going to try and remember, I said this to Daryl before we started, I'm going to try and remember to run this little banner every once in a while, because if you guys are watching this on quitefrankly.tv, you only get to see it once. And so if you're like, I missed what they said, or I want to, research something more, or I want some of the show notes, you just go to down here, bottom of the screen. You can go to either one of our Substacks, and all of the episodes live there going forward in video and forever since they started in audio. So I'll try to remember to run that at the bottom, but it's perpetualhealth.substack.com or teamdnutrition.substack.com. So I think that's all the stuff we have right now. Okay.
Isn't it cool that now we have stuff?
Just stuff.
No, but like we started, and you always see that in podcasts. You see that in progression. You like they start off and they just get into the podcast, and more advanced, or they start doing it for a while, and all of a sudden they have like little intros, and now we're here and here, and I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. It's just a little evolution.
I agree. I don't think I would. I was doing some video editing for quitefrankly.tv and now for Substack. And I did not really have a desire to go back to like the first couple of episodes, because I think it was like, it's just, I mean, yeah, we're like, we're using webcams and bad mics, and it probably, I haven't looked at it, but I'm sure it pales in comparison, and we're slowly making improvements every week. And, you guys make, comments, constructive criticisms, and we really do appreciate that, because, we want the show to be as enjoyable for you guys in terms of how you consume it, because it's fun for us to do, but it's only going to work if you guys are really enjoying the way you consume it, whether that's the audio, the video, whatever it is. And so, we like to play around with some things, and that intro was fun to create from the mind of Daryl, and somehow she connected the X-Files and nutrition, and somehow it makes perfect sense to me, which is fantastic. Yeah. But, okay. And I think today, somebody had mentioned this. I don't remember who it was, and I wish I had looked at it before we got on here, but somebody had asked us if we would cover this new cattle additive, Bovaer.
I have a hard time saying this. I want to say Bovaer, but that's just the French in me.
You're probably right, though. You're probably right, because for a week and a half, I was spelling it incorrectly. I was convinced that it was spelled EAR at the end, and it's not. So I kept writing it that way. Yeah. But so maybe we can cover that first, and then I have an Amos Miller update, and I think that would probably take over most of this episode, because normally we do headlines, and this is, I guess you could consider the Amos Miller thing a headline, and the Bovaer. This
is kind of a headline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of a headline at this point when we talk about it. Yeah.
It's true. So I'm trying to think of which way we start. Would you rather, Daryl, go into the Amos Miller court ruling? Because that's basically, for the audience, that's what happened. Amos Miller, for anybody who hasn't been paying attention, we were covering this for a while. And then last year, I was looking at the dates, and I think it was all the way back in like May when Daryl was away for a short period of time, and I was just doing, and it happened to coincide with court dates for Amos Miller, and so I was popping in, and it was like March, April, May timeframe, which just seems like forever ago.
Yeah.
Because
You
we're
were
almost.
like a journalist there for a little while.
Was that?
You were like a little journalist there for a little while.
I was considering going to the courthouse too, because it's only maybe like a 2-hour drive from me. But anyway, yeah. So it was.
Let's get the update.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to bring up the it's like a 15-page ruling. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole 15 pages, but Robert Barnes, the attorney for Amos Miller, and for those who don't know, Amos Miller is an Amish farmer in the state of Pennsylvania who's been harassed by the federal government for a while, the USDA. Now is being harassed by the state government of Pennsylvania for selling raw milk. And essentially they said, get a raw milk license. Yeah, I know, right? The boogeyman, raw milk. They asked him to get a license, and he said no, because if he gets a license, and some of that is in this ruling, if he gets a license to sell raw milk, that and becomes licensed, that would actually preclude him from selling any of his other raw dairy products. And that's really what people buy, like the colostrum and the yogurt and the kefir and all that other stuff. So
why? Sorry, I don't know the rules very much, because here in Canada it's just illegal.
Right.
So why if he gets a license for raw milk, he can't sell the other products?
I think it's simply because that's all the law covers. That's all the license covers. Nothing is, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't cover anything else in terms of dairy. So if he were to acquiesce to the state and say, okay, fine, I'll get licensed to sell raw milk, it strictly states raw milk and no other products. And
right. So he's theoretically operating with no licenses, and
correct.
That's needed in the States?
Well, that's the question. That's the real question, is that if you're selling to the public in like a grocery store, yes. But if you're selling farm to consumer, direct to consumer, that's the big thing. And they've been doing that for, forever. I mean, it's been that's the way we've done business forever in terms of like Americans, farmers just sell to the people, and then, the government gets involved and they want their cut and they want to protect the public, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But so these laws are all written.
Like, this is just one small farmer. They're not going to make. It's not about. I don't think it's about necessarily just about that. It's about closing these people down.
Right. Yeah. And the truth is, Amos Miller is probably in this country, he might be the biggest. I think he's probably the biggest Amish farmer, and I think that's why they're targeting him, because he actually has delivery in all 50 states. Or maybe not Alaska. Yeah, maybe not Alaska and Hawaii, but the continental U.S. And so I think you're right. I think they're trying to make an example of him, but they're also trying to exercise control over food, which is what they always do.
That was more,
yeah. So let me find our. I lost it for a second. Hold please. I will find this. Okay, so this is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Department of Agriculture versus Amos Miller. And this ruling, it was argued on October 8th. The ruling just came out. Robert Barnes, the attorney, filed January 3rd. So this is as we're recording this is just 2 days ago. Alleging sales of unpasteurized, quote, raw milk without a permit by Amos Miller. The trial court modified its preliminary injunction to not preclude sales to customers outside of Pennsylvania by order dated March 19th. And so for the background on that, originally for a short time period, for a couple of weeks, Amos Miller was precluded from selling to anybody anywhere. And that obviously would have put him out of business. They did an emergency order. They showed up in court, and the judge decided to allow them to sell anywhere outside of the state of Pennsylvania. He's obviously located in the state of Pennsylvania. And so the rules in Pennsylvania only apply to the state of Pennsylvania. And so therefore not to penalize anybody that was outside of the state. And that is the reason that Amos Miller was basically able to stay afloat. Just as a little bit of a background. I'm not going to read everything because again, it's only 15 pages, but Robert Barnes actually did these highlights. And so I wanted to just go through some of them. And this is the question that you asked earlier, Daryl. And it's because of these laws. So the Millers were concerned, counsel explained, that a permit would prohibit them from selling other products that the milk sanitation law, that's the law, and related regulations did not expressly authorize, such as raw milk butter, yogurt, colostrum, and kefir. Counsel for the department confirmed its belief that the millers were not allowed to sell those products under any circumstances. So this is the law. This is the the milk sanitation law. Boy, oh boy. That doesn't allow the sale of anything else but raw milk. And so that's why they didn't go for the permit, because everyone kept saying, I had people say, well, they should just get a permit. And first of all, I have a slight problem with that just on the principle. It's like, if we continue to allow the government to allow us to do things, then essentially we have no freedoms anymore. Your freedoms are now coming from the government to tell you what you can and can't do. And so, and then if you do get a permit, then you're not able to do business the way you want to do business. So there are multiple layers here where I think this is problematic. Some of this stuff I'm going to skip over because it's like legalese. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff, right? The trial court modified let's scroll. Being so jumpy.
Some of the most nutrient dense foods out there, and like gut healing and supportive. Putting out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The trial court explained it would decline to blur the line between the regulation of raw milk sales in the Commonwealth and interstate commerce. And so basically that just means, and the trial court pointed to federal cases involving other raw milk dairies in Pennsylvania and California, basically saying, listen, we're a Pennsylvania court. We can rule on the law within the state of Pennsylvania, but we are uncomfortable ruling on the law interstate commerce, meaning like selling anything outside of the state that it is produced in, if that makes sense. So in Canada, that would be like the provinces, right? So you could sell in between the provinces, but the rules of the province would govern that farm in that province.
Can't even do it.
Right. But, and that's also because, the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Canada are very different in that way. So the trial court's March 19th, 2024 order modified its prior March 1st order. So that was the time period where you couldn't buy anything from them, to not preclude sales of raw milk to customers outside of Pennsylvania. We kind of already covered that. We generally review preliminary injunction orders under a high differential abuse of discretion standard of review, basically to determine if there were any apparent reasonable grounds to support the court's decision. So I'm going to try to translate some of this for you. So basically, the state was arguing that this is an emergency situation, right? Despite the fact that, remember, and it's going to be in here, that Amos Miller has had no complaints against him. So just keep that in mind as the state is trying to make its argument that this is an emergency all of a sudden, when he's been practicing, that I know of, for a quarter of a century with no complaints. So it's kind of ridiculous on its face, but this was what the state was arguing. All of a sudden, Amos Miller is a danger to society, right? Let's see. So
an Amish farmer is a danger to society.
Truly. Let's see. Our courts have recognized. Sorry, go ahead.
If would he still be able to operate for meat? Say they like take everything away and stop him with the raw milk and all that. Is he going to be able to stay open with the meat?
As far as I know, yes, because for a while he was. But I think this is a slippery slope because their meat isn't inspected by the USDA either. So I think that if they were able to get him on this, then they would be able to get him basically on anything going forward, right? Like, in other words, I don't believe this was just about stopping him from selling raw dairy. I believe this was about putting him out of business completely.
But independent farmers don't get the FDA to look at their stock, right? It's when it goes in store that FDA needs to have their hands in, right?
Correct.
Okay, so why would that change for him?
Well, and I think that's exactly why we're in this court case, and that's their argument. Yeah. Yep. You're right. The fact that a party may obtain a preliminary injunction without adhering to formal rules of evidence show why it is generally imperative a preliminary injunction not serve as a final resolution. Basically, again, the preliminary injunction is just like an emergency order until the court can have a full understanding of what's going on. The Millers argue that a preliminary injunction of their out-of-state raw milk sales would bankrupt them, causing them to lose their family farm and effectively end the case before the trial court could decide the merits. So you understand what they're doing there. The state wanted to shut them down because they wanted to cause, very often it's just the lawfare in and of itself that is the punishment. So even if Amos Miller were found completely, innocent of this and he was able to get back to operation, just the process of being shut down for X amount of time, potentially
legal
months to
fees,
years.
all that stuff. Yeah. They just put people out of business in a different way and prolonged the court hearings and the whole process. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's really
exactly.
sad and cruel. It's funny because there's some fucking vaccines on the market that aren't even FDA approved, but you need to get your little local farmer to it's so fucked up. Things
I
are
know.
so backwards. Like
They really are.
Wild.
They really are.
And I joke, but this isn't a joking matter. This is real people, and it's very, very sad. Is his what's his name, Barnes? Is he doing this pro bono for him?
I believe so.
Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah, and that's why the donations.
Because this has been going on for so long that he,
Yeah.
Amos Miller probably wouldn't be able to continue to afford fighting like this.
No, and they've done multiple fundraisers. They sold over U.S. Thanksgiving. They sold, they were saying like $100 pumpkin pies. Obviously, the pies aren't normally $100, but the idea was that you get something in return for your donation, that kind of thing. And so, I spent a couple $100 at Thanksgiving for that reason. So recognizing the loss of the family farm constitutes irreparable harm because it involves the loss of generations of family history, sweat equity, and memories, and monetary damages are no substitute. Yeah, exactly. For these reasons, prohibiting the Millers out-of-state raw milk sales would substantially harm other interested parties in the proceedings. We conclude the trial court has apparently reasonable grounds to deny the department's preliminary injunction. So basically saying the state does not have the grounds to do what it wants to do. There's one really important section that I want to go through, and we're going to go through. Yeah. So the department. Okay. Yeah, this is great. The trial court did not find there would be irreparable harm without a preliminary injunction. The department did not present any witnesses who testified they were ill after consuming the Miller's raw milk products. The department presented no evidence whatsoever on the prong dealing with whether the injunction would not substantially harm the Millers. There was I was trying to figure out what this was. There's like a 6-prong approach that the state has to prove in order to get this preliminary injunction. And so if that word prong is just referring to like the prongs of the case, I guess.
Prong?
Yeah, PRONG.
Like prawn. Okay.
No.
Jay shoots words at me sometimes, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying. And what's the French version, please?
Daryl, I didn't understand this one either. I had to go and look through the document, and it's not it must be a legal term. It kind of was like, it wasn't well articulated. So I'm just assuming that's what it is. I'm no lawyer, but I'm just kind of playing one on this show.
Could be.
The department presented no evidence whatsoever on the prong dealing with whether the injunction would not substantially harm the Millers. Arguably, the department presented no evidence that granting the preliminary injunction would not adversely affect the public interest. Last two things. A critical consideration in the 6th prong is the harm that may come from granting an injunction. That is, the first 2 prongs look at the positive result that may come from granting an injunction, but the 6th prong considers the harm an injunction may cause. The Millers, who did not carry the burden, presented many witnesses to testify that it would harm their health or the health of their families if the injunction was granted. Because of a remand would not change the fact that evidence was not presented on all prongs. A remand would be fruitless. We follow our high court's lead and review whether the partial denial of the preliminary injunction in this case was proper. Put another way, even if the trial court found the department's expert credible over Miller's expert and concluded that the department established the injunction is necessary to prevent irreparable harm, the department needed to establish all 6 prongs, which it failed to do. So basically, they just, which is what Barnes was saying all along, is that the state has done nothing. They brought no witnesses. They just wanted to do it purely to exercise power, presumably, because they had no evidence on their side.
I'm honestly surprised they didn't pay somebody to speak ill.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Isn't that true? And I guess I'll go down to the very bottom. You know what? That's it. I mean, that's good enough. Basically, the court has just now agreed with the with the millers. And so far there is, luckily, now they're still not able to sell their products in Pennsylvania. So if you live in Pennsylvania, you would be wise to probably continue to contact your representatives, because you still can't buy their products, which is crazy. You can't just go to the farm and pick something up or order something. But if you live outside of Pennsylvania, luckily, you can still do that. And that is obviously going to keep them afloat, because they do a lot more business outside of the state than they do in the state. Although I'm sure it hurts them to some degree to not be able to sell to the local community. Yeah.
Like you can sell everywhere else, but not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make it make sense.
Make it make sense. Daryl, I wish I could. I mean, following this case has been one of the most, and I think they're doing another, I heard Barnes talking the other day about this, because again, this is, and people were asking me, well, once Trump's in office, he can just get rid of this case. Not necessarily. Remember, this is a state case, not a federal case. So if the USDA was on Amos Miller's back, which they were once upon a time, that's what started this. Remember, it was the USDA bothering Amos Miller.
Yeah.
And the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Barnes said, they were on all the calls, but they never said a word.
Yeah.
They just sat there. They just let it go. And then when the USDA finally dropped everything, that's when the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture stepped in. So if this was still the USDA, Trump could do something about it, but it's a state matter right now. So Amos is still up for a fight. And so I think they're going to do some kind of a fundraiser this summer. I think Barnes said they want to do some kind of like in-person dinner where like you pay a bunch of money to come and have dinner like on the farm, which is really cool. It's a great way to do it. And, but.
And he's, does he practice regenerative farming?
I don't think they use that term, but I think just the Amish way of doing things is by definition regenerative, I believe. Okay. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, are you heading into like, you're thinking like, the carbon cycle and like returning nutrients to the soil and rotational grazing and all those things that like are just so the way nature intended, right?
Correct. Yeah. And people get that confused, right? Like they think that like industrial farming is one thing, but regenerative farming is quite different in terms of emissions, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
And that would just be another beautiful point on his case, right?
Yeah.
To have that as opposed to industrial farming, which he's not, but
yeah. So shall we drift into the world of Bovaer or Bovaer?
Yeah. So ridiculous.
Oh, some people might not even know what this is. I didn't even know what this is.
Yeah. How did I send that to you?
You did on Instagram one day, and then somebody in our audience wanted it, and it's such an interesting thing. I don't know, where do you feel like starting?
I just think it's fucking dumb. Like,
well, it is. Of course it is.
Like, I think we were briefly just talking about it, but I don't think that a lot of people I don't think it's being explained well, the difference between methane emissions and the natural carbon cycling. I think people think that, I don't know what they think, but it just like once you understand it, you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense, right? Like carbon cycling is not the same process as, say, like fossil fuel emissions, right? Your carbon cycling is going to start with photosynthesis first, and which plants use sunlight and water and carbon, meaning that they take the carbon out of the air, which is already in the air. And then they turn it into, or they use it for cellulose, like grass, right? And then the cow consumes the grass, and then hence the carbon cycle, right? But it's not new carbon. People are like, oh, you got to stop the carbon footprint. It's not new carbon. It's recycled. It's not the same thing.
So they call it a cycle.
That's why they call it a cycle. And it's ridiculous. It's just, again, it's a matter of interfering with nature, and grass-fed regenerative farming is the solution, not industrial farming, not vegan movements, not these Band-Aid like solutions. Do you want to talk about a little bit what it is?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But I think you were right to sort of put this at a really high level to understand that. Now I'm going to grant, and maybe we'll do this in part 2, and maybe I don't have this available right now, and I won't make the audience wait for me to find it. But there's a couple of charts that I can pull up just from the EPA, because I want people to understand when people are arguing about cows causing climate change, like I want people to understand the absurd nature of that claim. Like it's like third grade logic, and I'm not even sure. I think that's an insult to third graders. As Daryl just explained it so perfectly, it's like for a while all you heard was carbon dioxide, right? CO2. Now all of a sudden it's methane, because I think that people started to realize, in fact, there were multiple papers published in the last couple of years that actually show there is a steady increase in carbon dioxide. And you know what's happening in conjunction with that? The earth is actually getting greener. There are areas in sub-Saharan Africa that are now deserts that are now getting greener. And I thought, I don't know, call me crazy, but isn't the whole green movement to help the earth become greener? I thought that was the whole point. And so in high school biology, you learn that carbon dioxide, as Daryl just said, is plant food. It is what plants use to create a carbohydrate source, ultimately through photosynthesis, for the cattle to consume. And then, yes, the cattle do produce methane, although methane is a much smaller percentage of the greenhouse gases. And then that methane, over a period of time, is oxidized, and the carbon from the methane is stripped away, made into carbon dioxide, which then the plants soak up yet again and continue that, what do we call it, a cycle. I mean, it's just so simple. But even if you look at the EPA's own data, maybe I'll try to pull that up in next week's episode. The amount that's contributed through agriculture in general, that includes animal and crop agriculture, is so minute compared to transportation and industry and other things. So it's mind-boggling that they would go after cows. But then that goes back to Daryl's point when we were talking about Amos Miller. It's not really about climate change or any of that, is it? It's about controlling the food supply. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and making money, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this feed is going to be sold all over the place.
Right. So maybe that's how we can just kind of cap off this, just by going over what Bovaer is, and I'll go right to their website and we can just read a few things about it, and then we'll like really kind of dive into that and a couple of other things in the next episode. All right, so let me share my screen again just so you guys can see. I'm going to read right off the company's website, because instead of making it up on my own, let's let Bovaer do the talking. So this is the company is DSM, I guess, that makes it.
Firmenich. Yep. Dutch.
It's Daryl, did you know that it's the proven solution for methane reduction?
Oh. Must be nice.
Must be nice to solve all the world's problems. I'll read you. Bovaer contributes a significant and immediate reduction of the environmental footprint of beef and dairy products. Remember that statement when I show you some of the EPA's own data. It has been approved by multiple authorities as being safe for use. Just a quarter teaspoon per cow per day reduces methane emissions from dairy cattle by 30% and up to 45% for beef cattle on average. It's extensively studied. Bovaer is the most extensively studied and scientifically proven solution to the challenge of burped methane to date. It's just like... with more than 130 on-farm trials in 20 countries and more than 80 peer-reviewed scientific studies. In every case, it is proven safe for consumers, farmers, and animals, having no impact on milk production or reproduction. I have a little bit of a bone to pick with that, but we'll just leave that aside for now. Bovaer is authorized and available for sale in over 65 plus countries, including the EU, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Mexico, Pakistan, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United States, South Korea, and Japan. And I'll read you how it works real quick. And this kind of goes to the carbon cycle that Daryl and I were just talking about. In a cow's rumen, microbes help break down food. This releases hydrogen and carbon dioxide. An enzyme combines these gases to form methane. Methane, for those of you who want to know, the chemical formula is CH4. It's carbon and 4 hydrogens. So an enzyme combines these gases to form methane. Bovaer is a feed supplement that suppresses the enzyme, so less methane gets generated. Just 1/4 teaspoon in a cow's daily feed takes effect in as little as 30 minutes. And as it acts, Bovaer is safely broken down into compounds already present in the rumen. And that's a little map of, take a look at the Bovaer trials and pilots around the world, everywhere from Australia to Canada and everywhere in between. Not Africa, though. Or Asia, actually.
And the thing with this is like, your regenerative farms are not going to buy this. Or maybe, I don't think they would.
It's a good question, right? Like,
but even then, it still doesn't make sense, because if it's regenerative farming, carbon cycle takes care of it. If it's not regenerative farming, I have a hard time with that word, and it's industrial farming, which is like they are fed corn, wheat, soy, whatever the hell they want to feed them, the methane secretion from that kind of feed, feed that they are fed, is far less, because it doesn't actually propel burping as much as cellulose does. So either route, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of this company, DSM Firmenich, which is who owns Bovaer, was originally formed in 1902 to mine coal. So they actually owned one of the biggest coal mines in the Netherlands, which is kind of ironic.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And I was asking you a question yesterday offline about shareholders and how that works, because I'm not great with that. And this company is funded mostly via shareholders. And what better way to bring up a value of a company than the widespread of this product and the sale of this product to all farms.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, again, like, it's just about making money, which is just about making money with a nice little bow of saving the planet.
Right. And you know what's interesting is I caught a small piece of a Dark Horse podcast episode where it's this husband and wife evolutionary biologists, both of them are, I think, actually. And they were talking about this, and they grabbed a couple of papers that were unrelated to Bovaer specifically, but to your point, one was from back in 2008, and they were identifying methane, as a potential greenhouse gas. And like I said, for the purposes of what Daryl and I are talking about here and what we'll talk about next week, I'm just going to grant them that greenhouse gases are a problem. I actually don't believe that is at all settled science whatsoever. But that's the argument that you hear. That's what they use as the gold standard. So let's just give them that, sort of cudgel to beat us with. Like, everything we have to do has to be to reduce greenhouse gases. Okay, fine. Again, way oversimplistic, tons of nuance. A lot of people don't think actually that's the problem, but let's just give it to them. So they were exploring in 2008 how to reduce methane emissions, and they were exploring other routes similar to Bovaer, not Bovaer, but ways to reduce methane emissions. And what they found was that at every turn, every time you intervene in the system, the biological system, very complex biological system, to reduce methane emissions, that over time, the enzymes, the bacteria that created the methane would upregulate and revert back to normal levels. So no matter what you did to interfere with nature always found a way to get back to equilibrium, because obviously this carbon cycle is literally the lifeblood of the planet. So it's amazing that people think, like Bill Gates, who is, I believe he's invested, or at least he's very much in favor of this stuff. I don't know if he's...
Of course he is.
Yeah.
He's probably one of the fucking shareholders in the company. That's why.
I have no doubt. Yeah. I didn't look into that, but I have no doubt.
I didn't look into the shareholders either. It's actually really hard information to get. It was hard to figure out where they got their funding. It just basically says primarily from shareholders.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, like, that these people who are, Bill Gates is a businessman. He's not educated. I mean, he's literally not educated. He doesn't even have a college degree. Not that means anything in terms of credentials, but what I'm saying is that he's limited in his understanding of biology. He's limited in his understanding of biochemistry and of of environment and of astrophysics, like the sun and what it contributes to the changing climate on the earth. He's just uneducated in the field. And so he looks at things very black and white, like you would if you were running a business. You make one intervention, and then he thinks that isn't going to create a chain reaction that millions of years of biological evolution have specifically crafted for a purpose. And it's like these enzymes that create methane, it's a metabolically expensive process, and you can't just interrupt it and not think that something else is going to happen. And then here's the other thing. What happens if you just have to, if the methane emissions go back to baseline after a while? What does that mean? That means you're going to need more and more Bovaer. Oh, isn't that the perfect product to create, that the more you use it, the more you need? What an interesting business model. So
the thing too is where we have animals today that roam free, we had animals hundreds of years ago there, maybe different ones like bison and whatnot, but everything was fine back then. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that changed? Is it actually the cattle grazing the land that's the issue, or is it something else?
Something else I vote for.
And if we want to, tug on emotional strings like save the planet, what about poverty and famine? The only way to replenish soil and to make soil how do you say, useful to use to grow whatever you want to grow is by livestock, because 2/3 of our total farming is actually you can't use it, and you need them to graze the soil so that it can replenish nutrients. So if we switched over to more of the regenerative farming practices, we would actually have more soil, more food, less famine, and like that's a whole other point. So I'm not sure where they're trying to go with this, because with their saving the planet model, it just doesn't make sense if you just look at the carbon cycle, just that, right?
That point that you made is so critical for people to understand. I wrote a Substack called Cattle Lives Matter like a year ago, maybe even 2 years ago, with older data. And what I came across, what you just said, when I came across that, I was blown away, because I didn't know that basically 2/3 of the earth is called marginal land, meaning we can't even use it for food. We can't grow food on it. The only thing that can be done there is ruminant animals grazing and then upcycling their nutrients into the meat and milk and dairy, some of the most nutrient dense food on the planet. So
totally.
Wow, this whole episode comes full circle, doesn't it, Daryl? Because what's the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture trying to put a stop to, right? So like you said, some of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. And if it was really about feeding the children in Africa or protecting the earth, you would leave nature to its own devices.
Yeah, exactly. Not to mention, like, if we also want to talk about water, because that's often like a thing that the vegans bring up. Lots of use of water. It's actually mostly rain that they use, and they just like pee. The cows pee in the rain, the pee and rain. That's it. But how much fucking water do you need to make all of your fucking vegan products, right? Your nut milks and your oat milks and all of those other things that you, not to mention all the packaging that comes with that, all the double wrap plastic packaging that comes with that. So make it make sense. I'm just gonna say that should be the title of the episode. Make it make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Maybe it should be. Maybe it will be.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the biggest things that we can close this out with is just by saying you need to look at the facts of an argument, because very often, this is the theme that I notice in nutrition, but I notice it in every other field, is that very often it's not the problem that people are trying to solve. They're trying to create an industry around the solution, similar to the cancer industry, which is, I hate to break this to people, but we've said this before, the cancer industry, not the individual researchers, but the cancer industry in and of itself, this behemoth that has become an industry, does actually not want to solve the problem of cancer, because guess what happens when that happens? You go away. You are obsolete. And this is the danger of humans getting involved in anything. It is something that has to just be monitored because it is human nature to want to defend one's livelihood. I understand that. But you often have to really balance your personal goals, ambitions, financial ambitions with the actual right thing to do, which is, are you trying to solve the problem, or are you just trying to go along to get along and just perpetuate an industry that essentially becomes self-sustaining on the problem rather than solve the problem? I know that was a lot of that's like a circular logic, but that's kind of the way the industries are built, on this circular logic. They don't actually want to look at where the problem solving could come from. So they all feel comfortable staying inside the status quo. And if the status quo is greenhouse gas emissions are the problem, let's face it, Daryl, there's nothing that human beings could do that would actually eliminate greenhouse gases. It's not possible. And so therefore the solution never comes, and we can just continue to perpetuate this industry on a lie.
Totally. Yeah. I think they also know, first of all, you got to look at who is backing all of these like movements. If it's large companies who are selling a product, that's like the same stuff you see. It's like if you go on Instagram and you have this beautiful girl who's selling this green juice, you know, before she gives you advice on anything, find out if she's trying to sell you something. It's the same thing, but on a larger scale. And I think that they love to just, you know, push statements and play on people's heartstrings, right? Like, this is going to be good for the planet. This is going to be good for this, because they know that in society, we have little groups like that all are like, yeah, save the planet, right? But I think they also know that a lot of those people might not do the research and might just say, yeah, I identify with this group and let's go, we're saving the planet, right? And I've had actually a lot of conversations with that with my clients, because mostly new ones who come along and they're like, you know, I kind of want to do a couple days a week vegetarian. Your food choices are totally your choice. But then when they say for climate change, I can't help myself. I'm like, okay, can you explain? And let's just have a conversation. This is not, you absolutely can do meatless Mondays if you want, please. Totally. Let's do it in a good way. Let's not buy Beyond burgers. And then when I ask about how eating less meat helps save or helps against climate change, nobody can explain it.
Exactly.
Nobody can explain it. And then what I do is I send them a lovely YouTube video on carbon cycling. And then they're like, wow, I never knew this, right? And just a little fun note there, meatless Mondays, if we did meatless Mondays, they would reduce carbon footprint by 0.03%. Okay.
This is going to be the perfect segue into next week when I show you some of the EPA's data. Because this is, Daryl, you're an educator as much as you are a nutritionist. And that's what I consider myself as well. And whether you want to be or not, you are. And that's part of this process, is that we have to educate so that people aren't running around with, you know, information that they don't know where it comes from. And that makes them a less empowered member of society. And I always, if you still decide that after everything you know, if you still decide to listen to the just sort of programming that's in the ether rather than the actual data, that's fine. But at least you've been told, and maybe someday it'll resonate with you. And I think that's really an important piece of it.
And I do have some clients who still have like vegetarian nights because they just like it. That's fine. It's not a problem, right? Another thing I'll send them is a post of my boy JT traveling in his fucking jet from Quebec to BC to go skiing when there's skiing right in Quebec.
Well, Daryl, very stressful job. It's a very stressful job. What a great place to end this episode. So I guess we're going to carry this over because I had so many headlines and things like that, but this is a great conversation and one that I think really needs to be had. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into this next week. So I guess thank you guys for hanging out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Ciao for now.